All right, well, hello. Thank you for stopping by. We're going to talk a little bit about Dell technologies and Dell EMC's data protection for VMware, so thanks for joining us today. Couple things that are happening in the industry today. First of all, data is growing at a pretty phenomenal rate. It's not just growing, it's actually changing. A lot of organizations are going through IT transformation. They're changing the way that they're delivering applications and data and the entire user experience. Better? Okay. So it's not really just growing, it's actually mutating, I think you would call it, right? And what we're seeing is customers are spending more in data protection, they're spending more in cloud, but somehow they're also being asked to do more with less. So that's a really, that's a dynamic that's difficult to address. The one thing that we're seeing in data protection, and whether it's cloud or whether it is data protection at scale, is the idea that efficiency is needed to drive those lower costs and better results, whether it comes about performance or consumption of resources or how long it takes to do backups and recoveries, et cetera. But in any case, what we do see that is dramatic is that the backup and recovery landscape is changing a lot around cloud. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how Dell EMC can help protect for VMware, and specifically VMware in the AWS use cases as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping to get this out of the way. When I'm talking about Dell EMC's data protection portfolio, little known fact is it is actually the #1 data protection company in the world when you combine our hardware and software assets for the purpose of doing backup and recovery. We have a platform called Data Domain, which is the world's most popular data protection storage device. And coupled with our data protection suite, that has for many years been kind of the gold standard in data protection across the data centers in the world. And we have a converged version of that story, which is called the IDPA, or the Integrated Data Protection Appliance. However, we're also undergoing our own digital transformation. We're replatforming and taking all of our capabilities and technologies and building them upon a new platform called PowerProtect. So PowerProtect is next generation software. It's based on an entirely new architecture that we can deliver in a rapid, agile, and software-defined fashion. PowerProtect software also has a companion appliance where it can come integrated with PowerProtect and the data domain technology baked into a multi-dimensional scale cube, right? PowerProtect software is fairly new. We just announced it this summer, so it doesn't cover all of the use cases that our traditional data protection suite does, but what it does cover first and best is VMware. It is absolutely excellent at the VMware use case, as you would imagine, and that's why we're here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the PowerProtect X400, that's that integrated appliance that I mentioned. So the PowerProtect X400, again, based on PowerProtect software, integrated with data domain technology as a storage platform. Very simple to install, very simple to upgrade, very different from your typical enterprise experience. It's a few clicks to get up and running, and the installs and the upgrades are actually just a few clicks as well. So it's much more like a consumer-driven product. It has multi-dimensional scale, both up and out, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. And it's available in hybrid or in an all-flash array. So this is the first purpose-built backup appliance that's integrated and actually has an all-flash option for customers that need that type of performance. We have the ability to scale linearly from a performance and a capacity perspective. Welcome. And the interesting thing about that is it's not just linear, it's linear in that proper 45-degree fashion. Some folks do linear scale, but it's only at a kind of a lazy 30 degrees or 20 degrees. That doesn't mean that you're getting as much of one as the other. So just to be clear, linear performance and capacity means that we continue to grow and scale in an accurate and fair way as we go. And we're also working with something called machine learning to take this cluster, this grid of protection appliances, and put the optimal data placement for them so you can use the power of deduplication without having to have our customers manage where to put the data every single time. We're going to take care of that for you in this appliance. Okay? So this is the PowerProtect X400 appliance, and I mentioned that it does do some scaling up and scaling out. So when I look at that, I have a control node that's basically based on 4 systems. Under the covers, we don't really talk about it, but it's based on a vSAN technology with a vSAN high availability. And then the storage cubes are available in 64 terabyte increments. And you can actually scale up. Right now, with our first release, you can scale up to 4 nodes, which gives you about 400 terabytes usable, depending on whether you're hybrid or all-flash. But by the end of the year, we're going to allow customers to scale up to 12 cubes or a petabyte usable. That's prior to any deduplication or compression. So logically, you can fit up to 50, 60, maybe more petabytes of backup data on a very small footprint. So it's the greatest efficiency and greatest performance already in the industry. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of an interesting feature with PowerProtect, and then I'm going to move on to some of our more traditional use cases. But this December, we're introducing PowerProtect support for backing up Kubernetes environments. So what we're starting with is enterprise-grade protection, so it is an enterprise backup software. It's management for enterprise IT and Kubernetes admins, so it's where DevOps and IT can come together and agree on a solution. And we're collaborating with VMware Valero to actually make this happen. In future releases, by the way, incorporating things like VMware Tanzu, you're actually going to find bits and pieces of our code embedded already into vSphere out of the box and vice versa. So there's a lot of hooks that are being built to make that happen. This is a little bit of a busy slide, so I'm not going to spend too much time explaining all of it, but if you're working with Kubernetes or containers, you probably are familiar with what the concept is here. I think the main thing to understand is that our solution is going to have controls for the VMware admin integrated into vSphere, integrated into Tanzu. So if you're a VMware admin and you want to do our backup using PowerProtect for Kubernetes, your control is basically using the tools that you're familiar with. If you are an IT admin who runs the backups and you want to back up and protect through the PowerProtect administrative console, that's going to be available for you as well. So nothing new to learn. You don't have to pop over to vCenter and you don't have to be a Kubernetes expert. And similarly, if you're in the DevOps role, if you have a role where you're actually responsible for running the Kubernetes environment and you want to run it from the Kubernetes API using kubectl, et cetera, that's something that's available to you as well. So each persona gets to use their own native tools to manage the Kubernetes backup. And essentially what we do is we automatically and easily deploy two namespaces. We'll deploy the Valero namespace and we'll deploy our PowerProtect namespace to control the backup and recovery of Kubernetes, right? So it can be self-service or it can be centralized through an IT policy or schedule. And the targets would be the PowerProtect appliance, which I referred to earlier, or it could be a data domain system, or it could be an on-prem object storage like Dell ECS, and of course it could be something like Amazon's S3 object storage as well. So we're going to be very flexible in the number of storage targets we support. Out of the box, initially it's going to be biased a little bit towards the simple what we do today, which is data domain-based platforms, with S3 coming shortly thereafter. Any questions on this, by the way? Okay, cool. Thank you for coming, by the way. All right, so what do we do to protect VMware? There's a lot of different things that our customers are asking for us when it comes to protecting VMware, because it's not just backup and recovery, it's not just on-prem. There's a lot of things going on. So if one of the things we do is we do long-term retention of backups, the ability to use cloud as a deduplicated archive for the convenient and cost-effective storing of your backup images, right? Most of the time, if you're working with VMware on-prem or even in the cloud, you probably want to keep maybe 30 days of backups close by for instant or quick recovery. But you might have some applications or some data that's under compliance where you need to keep it for 5 years or 7 years or whatever. If that's the case, it's better to put that in the cloud and dedupe it rather than to store it on an appliance, because otherwise you'd have a really big appliance on-prem and there's no need to pay for that. We can also use the cloud as a disaster recovery zone, right? Traditionally, we've had site-to-site disaster recovery, or maybe you go to a service provider or have some sort of contract, but the cloud is a very easy way to spin up disaster recovery and be able to take your on-prem or cloud-based operations and simply spin them up in an orchestrated and automatic and easy way at the time of a disaster. Also good for testing, by the way. We do definitely support VMware Cloud on AWS, and I'll tell you about that support in a little bit more depth recently. And of course, we also support some of the native AWS and cloud workloads. I'll also talk about those. So let's dive deep into some of these. All right. Built into the solution, that long-term retention I talked about. Now, a lot of providers will go out there and use object storage for long-term retention. It's a fairly obvious thing to do. How we are different is, first of all, we provide enough efficiency on the box to keep all of those daily copies for 30 days. We don't have to do cloud ingress or egress for normal operational recovery. We truly look at cloud as long-term retention. When we send data to the cloud, we're going to deduplicate it, and we're going to compress it. So we're going to keep the same algorithm that we use on-prem to have the most efficient experience, to also lower the cost for storing that data long-term in the cloud. Now, Finally, when we recover from the cloud, we're intelligent enough to only pull back the bits and pieces in the cloud that are unique in the cloud, and if there's a copy of some of that data on-prem, we'll use the on-prem copy instead, thereby lowering your egress charges when you're recovering some of those long-term retention copies. Now, keep in mind, what we try to target for this is those compliance copies that are not for operational purposes. This is for lawyers, this is for discovery, these are for other types of activities, right? We want to make sure that if you actually need something operationally, that you keep it local or keep it proximate to your data source so you have rapid recoveries with no extra cost. We're going to talk also about disaster recovery on the next slide, so I won't cover that as well, but disaster recovery also built into the box. So this is a solution specific for when you're backing up VMware images using our solution. What we will do, this is kind of the opposite of long-term retention. With disaster recovery, you're taking the backups from last night and the night before, maybe 7 days, maybe 14 days. But in this mode, what we're going to do is we're going to store those images compressed directly in an S3 bucket on AWS. Right? So that's the cheapest way to possibly store it in AWS. Now, unlike our previous solution, we actually do use a little bit of compute all the time in AWS. We have one EC2 instance that's an orchestrator that's available to you in the cloud should you need to declare a disaster, but it's just a single EC2 instance that's running. Right? At the time a disaster is declared or you want to do a test, excuse me, we will do a conversion of those images and actually restore them into an Amazon EC2 instance in the proper format. So on-prem, it's a VMDK. In the cloud, it's an EC2 instance. Now there's a couple caveats to that. There's a couple of options. If you want to do this, but instead restore to VMware Cloud on AWS, we can do that too. We're still storing in the S3 bucket, so the cheapest possible way to store that data and keep it for standby, but we don't need to take the time to do the conversion. So now you're restoring VMDK from on-prem directly into VMDK in VMware Cloud on AWS at the time of a disaster. The advantages of doing something like that are pretty straightforward. If I'm operating in a VMware vSphere environment and my applications need to be recovered, maybe I don't want to do a paradigm shift into an Amazon operational mode at the time of a disaster. Maybe that's not the time I should be thinking about what's the difference between vSphere and the AWS console, right? Now, you might have capabilities and you might be running in a multi-cloud world where that's not a big deal. So we support both. But recovering to VMware Cloud on AWS in kind of in a just-in-time way is actually pretty cool. So we keep the cost down by storing all these images into the AWS S3 bucket. We only use a single compute instance to keep that cost down as well. And you can be selective about it. It's not all or nothing. So you can pick particular applications. You can tell those applications how long you want to retain in the cloud for DR purposes. This is a very effective way of getting rid of those expensive third-party sites, a service provider, or maybe putting in idle gear somewhere else, because the only thing that you're using, unless you're doing a disaster, is that S3 storage. All right. So what if you're using VMware Cloud on AWS? Is anybody using it or considering running in VMware Cloud on AWS? Excellent. So what are you doing right now to protect the data there?
So we don't have it deployed yet.
Okay. Okay, okay. So we were the first partner to support backup and recovery for VMware Cloud on AWS. We actually launched in August of 2017. And all of our solutions do work to protect that data using our industry-leading deduplication. Now, one of the things that we considered is how do we design the solution, because there's a data management part of it, and there's a storage part of it. So the storage part, it was a no-brainer that we would go with our data domain platform in a virtual edition, software-defined and built in the cloud. For the software, we decided we're going to enable all of our software, not just some of it, to go ahead and work on VMware Cloud on AWS. So whatever you're using from our data protection suite, whether it's Avamar, whether it's Networker, whether it's PowerProtect, we're going to take care of that. Now the thing is, if you think about what this is, VMware Cloud on AWS, I'm running on a vSAN architecture that's for rent. And one of the most precious resources then is going to be the all-flash storage in that architecture. So by definition, my backup storage to my protection storage, or to my primary storage, is going to be about a one-to-one relationship. So I don't want to store my backups on the vSAN in VMC, because I'd be splitting that data in half, basically. And that's fairly expensive to do. That's not a good value proposition. It's also not a really good idea, just from the standpoint of if it's all one vSAN and I'm protecting the data on the vSAN and the vSAN goes belly up, what do I do? So what we decided to do was put our software, our data management software assets running natively in the vSphere environment and then send the data across the ENI interconnect to your own Amazon VPC where you're running Data Domain Virtual Edition, backed by an S3 bucket. So we have the power of our deduplication, but we have it running outside of the VMC. Now, the cool thing that VMware did when they launched VMC is usually there's an egress charge whenever you move data from point to point. This is a particular exception. When you're moving your backup data out of your VMC and into your own Amazon VPC, there's no charge to do that. Okay? So what this allows you to do is keep an operating mode in VMC that's identical to whatever tools you would deploy on premise. So whether you're using our Avamar, our Networker, maybe our DD Boost for applications. Technically, this could work with a third-party backup software vendor that is also certified for VMC on AWS. The one thing that I would say is whoever you do use as a backup software vendor here does need to be certified, because the VMC model for vSphere is more of a client-tenant type of environment, and most backup software assumes that it can write to the root of a vCenter. It can't in VMware Cloud on AWS. So you do have to work with a certified partner of VMware's. Like I say, I hope you choose to use ours, but this entire topology would work with any certified solution or even homegrown tools. Some folks have things they want to do that back up with scripts or whatever the case may be. So getting a little more obscure, because this is a fairly new announcement from VMworld of this year and also Dell Technology World a little bit earlier in the summer. How many folks are familiar with something called VMware Cloud on Dell EMC? Okay. This is a fully managed stack of the VMware environment on-premise, on customer premise, that is managed and fully run by Dell. So if you want a cloud experience and you want to hand the management over to somebody else, we're going to provide an entirely cloud-based VMware experience on your own data center. We offer unique and exclusive backup capabilities for that solution as well. I won't go on that too much because, again, it's a fairly new solution. Another thing that we're finding is becoming very popular is backup as a service. Right? Backup is done, for a lot of organizations, is becoming a very predictable, routine experience from the standpoint of people just want a certain thing out of it. They want daily backups. They want them for 30 days. They want them replicated off-site. It's kind of cut and paste from the standpoint of what they want. Now, it's a lot like Exchange Online and Office 365, some organizations are figuring, let's hand that over to somebody else because there's no value in us doing that. And if that's what your organization is feeling, then there are a number of service providers enabled in the VMware Partner Program who actually run vCloud Director and can host the entire thing for you. We actually support vCloud Director and backup and recovery for vCloud Director to give folks simple and single one-click backup of an entire VPC and the recovery and self-service that comes along with that. So it's a great solution if you happen to be using a service provider. And again, we have a lot of different reasons why that's a good thing to do. Not many backup providers actually support VMware Cloud Director, but there are over 4,000 VMware service providers that are supporting vCloud Director as a way of providing this as a service. All right. A couple things that are off the VMware plate and more of an AWS-centric thing. Just to point out that a lot of the things that I've discussed, whether it's backup and recovery, continuous replication, disaster recovery, all of those things that we support in a mode for VMware, both on-prem, in a hybrid cloud, and as well as a public cloud, we do support for native AWS as well. We realize that some folks here are using VMware on-prem and using some combination of VMware or just native AWS services. So we do support the long-term retention that we talked about when we're backing up AWS resources. We do support disaster recovery, in-cloud protection, as well as backup to cloud. In fact, this morning, I was actually talking to a customer, it's a media customer that has a very large on-prem SAP environment, and they're using successfully our technology to back up to AWS using Data Domain Virtual Edition, their entire SAP environment. So it's something that's kind of a unique capability. Now their backups are actually on a different location than their primary SAP instance. And that's something they did for a couple of business choices and risk management choices. But the key is that the ability to move data in deduplicated form is the key enabler for that, because otherwise you would have to have an infinite amount of bandwidth or an infinite amount of time to get that job done. Right? And in our discussion, their results were so promising, we kind of described what they're doing as teleporting data into the cloud. It's really an effective way of doing things. And of course, because you're sending data into the cloud, there's no ingress charges, right? And if you're doing a recovery, that's when you'd consider what the cost would be. But so far, they're running very well and very happy and successfully using Data Domain Virtual Edition as a target for an on-premise SAP environment that's critical to the life of a company. If you know SAP it's one of those top 2 or 3 applications for businesses. If a business is running it, it's really important to them, right? Now, if you're running in AWS, we can certainly support everything that's going on in AWS. All of your EC2 instances. We do have solutions that will protect most of the databases available in RDS. We have a way of doing snapshots and managing AWS snapshots across multiple accounts, multiple regions, multiple availability zones, move that data back and forth. There have been some folks who have been announcing similar things at this show this week. We've been doing this for 2 years, right? Because we understand that there's a need to basically enhance the built-in AWS tools and give you greater capabilities across a multi-account, multi-region, multi-AZ situation. However, sometimes it's not enough to simply use those native built-in tools. I have a customer that's running a large database environment on IaaS in AWS, and the tools that they're using, the snapshots of EC2, just won't take care of the job. It won't give you a consistent enough application backup. So for that, we can run our data protection suite, our backup software, can be run in AWS natively. So you can download any of the options for our data protection suite directly from the marketplace. It's a bring your own license, so you'd engage with us to get a license for the capacity. And then they write to the Data Domain Virtual Edition. So Data Domain Virtual Edition, again, gives you the industry-leading deduplication and performance and reliability for your data, as well as the ability to replicate that data to another AZ, to another region, perhaps to another cloud, or back to on-prem. But again, because it is the most efficient way to store backup data, it's also the most efficient way to move backup data, and is very impactful in terms of the cost of moving and storing that data around. Now, a lot of folks have said, well, why don't we go with something cheaper for our backup data, right? Right now, Data Domain Virtual Edition, about 10% of it is EBS for the metadata, for performance, and about 90% of it is stored on S3 for cost and for availability. Excuse me. Now, some folks say, well, why don't we do something like S3IA, because it's cheaper? Or why don't we do Glacier, because it's cheaper, and even though we know it's less available? At 2x deduplication, we're cheaper than S3 alone. At 4x deduplication, we are cheaper than S3IA one zone. And after 6x deduplication, we're actually cheaper to store on DDVE than it is to store on Glacier. It's just math. It's just because we're able to reduce the data 6 times, that's where you get that benefit. Now, our typical customer across the globe, because we get auto supports and understand what the data reduction they're getting, our average customer running in AWS gets 10 to 1. So from a financial model perspective, it's a no-brainer. Customers are saving money by storing backups on Data Domain Virtual Edition cheaper than even just storing that data in Glacier. And Glacier's a great place for long, deep archive of stuff you never, ever want to touch again, but it's not a good place for backup. It's not a good place to keep your data safe in case you need it in a hurry to get it back real quick. So that's just a function of math. So we're actually extremely thrilled about the growth that we've had in this space. About 2016 is when we started working with Amazon and with some of the other cloud providers. Across Amazon and one other cloud provider right now, we have over 2 exabytes of logical data stored in this fashion using our deduplication technology. So this is certainly a growing concern for us, and our customers are finding the value of being able to basically get the same reliable on-prem experience, shorten their backup windows, move the data around using less ingress and egress charges, and basically fundamentally use a lot less storage than they would if they were using the native services. And by the way, there are a lot of other organizations out there that try to do this story. Our claim to fame, the one thing that we do hands down better than anybody else, is efficiency. When it comes right down to it, we're talking about doing 20x, 50x, and beyond in VMware use cases. Most of the competition out there would be lucky to get 3 to 5x, and they'll tell you so. I'm not saying anything disparaging. By their own admission, they expect to get about 3 to 5x data reduction. So the key here in thinking about it from a cloud perspective is the bill is always running. Right? When you put something in the cloud, you're paying for it every month. I'm not going to pay your cloud bill. Our competitors aren't going to pay the cloud bill. So at the end of the day, if I can use half of the storage and half of the compute and half of the network of my competition, then on a spreadsheet I've already won the conversation. And it's no longer about big ideas and pretty software. It's really about brass tacks and cost management, which is one of the main factors of data protection. You know what? We got 4 minutes and 37 seconds left to go, but I think we're going to bring it home even sooner than that. So thank you for the update. Let's do this. Let's make it an official Dell EMC presentation. You know what makes it an official presentation? We've got a sign here that says we're number one at something, right? Marketing has this rule. I think it's by law. We have to tell you we're number one. But it is actually true. We're not known as just a data protection company, but our data protection division, actually, if you take our hardware and software assets and add them together, we sell more data protection than any other company in the world, hands down, even the dedicated and popular data protection companies. So it's a big business for us. It's something we take very seriously. We've acquired some of the best-of-breed assets, including the data domain platform, which again is that storage that does all of these magic things. I'm a little bit biased. I come from the data domain acquisition. I joined them in 2006 and still living the dream. So with that, I know I've got a couple minutes left, but I thought maybe I'd see if you guys have any questions that I can answer. You good? Well, if that's the case, then thanks for stopping by, and hope you guys have a great rest of the show and stay hydrated. All right.